The morning sun cast long shadows across the military shooting range as Sergeant James Morrison adjusted his ceremonial red tunic. The fabric felt foreign against his skin after years of wearing combat fatigues in the mountains of Afghanistan. 6 months had passed since his transfer from the Special Air Service to the Household Division, and he still wasn't used to the pomp and ceremony that came with guarding Buckingham Palace. James walked toward the range where a group of regular army soldiers were already setting up their equipment. He had hoped for a quiet morning of practice, wanting to maintain his shooting skills despite his new ceremonial role. The familiar weight of the rifle in his hands brought back memories of distant conflicts where precision meant the difference between life and death. "Look what we have here," called out Corporal Davies, a stocky man with a thick Welsh accent. "The palace princess has come to play soldier with the real men." His comment drew snickers from the other soldiers who had gathered around the firing line. They saw James as nothing more than a tourist attraction in a fancy uniform, someone who spent his days standing motionless outside palace gates rather than engaging in real military work. Private Collins, barely 20 years old and eager to impress his peers, joined in the mockery. "Does your rifle even fire real bullets or just blanks for the changing of the guard ceremony?" The group erupted in laughter, clearly enjoying their target practice of a different kind. They had no idea that the quiet man in the red tunic had spent 3 years with one of the world's most elite military units. James remained silent as he set up his position at the far end of the range. He had learned long ago that words rarely changed minds, but actions always spoke louder. The other soldiers continued their banter, making jokes about ceremonial duties and questioning whether palace guards even knew how to hold a weapon properly. Their confidence grew with each laugh, each jest making them feel superior to the man they saw as nothing more than a glorified tourist guide. The rangemaster, an older sergeant who had seen decades of service, watched the interaction with growing discomfort. He recognized something in James's calm demeanor that the younger soldiers missed entirely. There was a stillness about him that spoke of experience, a quiet confidence that came from facing real danger rather than just training scenarios. "Maybe we should have a little competition," suggested Davies, his voice carrying across the range. "Show the pretty boy how real soldiers shoot." The suggestion was met with enthusiastic agreement from the group, who saw it as an opportunity to humiliate the royal guard in front of everyone present. They began setting up targets at various distances, each one eager to demonstrate their superiority. James methodically prepared his rifle, checking each component with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this thousands of times, under much more challenging conditions. The familiar routine brought a sense of calm that contrasted sharply with the boisterous energy of the other soldiers. He thought about his former teammates in the SAS, wondering what they would think of this situation. The mockery continued as the soldiers placed bets on how poorly the Royal Guard would perform. They joked about palace duty making soldiers soft, about ceremonial uniforms being more important than actual combat skills. None of them noticed the way James's hands moved with precision, or how his eyes automatically calculated wind speed and distance with unconscious expertise. As the morning progressed, more soldiers gathered to witness what they expected to be an embarrassing display of incompetence. Word had spread quickly through the base about the impromptu competition, and many came hoping to see the palace guard put in his place. The atmosphere grew increasingly charged with anticipation and barely concealed contempt. James finished his preparations in silence, his mind automatically shifting into the focused state that had kept him alive during countless dangerous missions. The laughter and jeers faded into background noise as he prepared to show these men what 3 years of SAS training could produce. He knew that in a few minutes everything would change, and the soldiers who thought they knew what a real warrior looked like were about to learn a lesson they would never forget. The competition began with Corporal Davies stepping up to the firing line with obvious confidence. He had won several marksmanship competitions within his regiment and considered himself one of the best shots on the base. The target stood at 200 meters, a standard distance for military qualification tests. Davies took his time, adjusting his stance and breathing as he had been taught in basic training. His first shot hit the target near the center, earning approving nods from the gathered crowd. "Not bad for a warm-up," he announced, clearly pleased with himself. His next 4 shots grouped reasonably well, creating a pattern that would easily pass any standard marksmanship test. The other soldiers cheered and clapped, treating his performance as if he had just accomplished something extraordinary. Private Collins went next, his nervousness showing despite his earlier bravado. Being the youngest member of the group, he felt pressure to prove himself worthy of their respect. His shots were less precise than Davies's, but still adequate for military standards. The crowd offered encouragement, building up his confidence and further reinforcing their belief that they were about to witness an easy victory over the Royal Guard. 2 more soldiers took their turns, each performing competently but not exceptionally. The mood remained light and celebratory, with frequent glances toward James to gauge his reaction to their shooting prowess. They expected to see nervousness or doubt in his expression, but instead found only calm observation. His lack of visible concern puzzled some of them, but they attributed it to either arrogance or ignorance about his own limitations. The rangemaster called for the targets to be changed and moved to 300 meters for the next round. This distance separated casual shooters from those with genuine skill, and the soldiers knew it would be more challenging. Still, their confidence remained high, especially after their decent performance at the shorter distance. Davies volunteered to go first again, determined to maintain his position as the group's champion. The increased distance required more concentration and skill, and his first shot missed the target entirely. A moment of silence fell over the crowd before someone made a joke about the wind, restoring the light-hearted atmosphere. His remaining shots were scattered across the target, a performance that would barely meet minimum standards. The other soldiers fared even worse at the longer distance. Collins managed only 2 hits out of 5 shots, his inexperience becoming obvious as the challenge increased. The laughter became more forced as each shooter struggled with the greater difficulty. But they maintained their confident attitudes, convinced that James would perform even worse when his turn came. "Your turn, Palace boy," Davies called out, gesturing toward the firing line with exaggerated courtesy. "Try not to embarrass the Queen too badly." The crowd gathered closer, expecting entertainment from what they anticipated would be a humiliating failure. Some had already begun preparing jokes about ceremonial soldiers being better suited to standing still than actually shooting. James walked to the firing line with unhurried movements, his expression unchanged by the pressure or expectation surrounding him. He positioned himself behind the rifle with fluid efficiency, his body automatically assuming the proper stance that had been drilled into him through years of intensive training. The transformation was subtle but immediate. The ceremonial soldier disappeared, replaced by something harder and more focused. He chambered around with practiced precision, the mechanical action as natural as breathing. His eyes surveyed the target downrange, automatically calculating factors that the other soldiers had never learned to consider. Wind direction, temperature, humidity, even the slight elevation difference between his position and the target, all became part of an unconscious equation that his trained mind solved in seconds. The crowd fell silent as they watched him settle into position. Something in his demeanor had changed, a shift so profound that even the least experienced soldier could sense it. The casual confidence that had carried them through their own shooting suddenly felt misplaced, replaced by a growing unease that none of them could quite explain. James controlled his breathing with the discipline of someone who had taken shots while under enemy fire. His finger found the trigger with familiar ease, and for a moment, the bustling military base faded away. In his mind, he was back in the mountains of Afghanistan, where missing meant his teammates might not come home. The weight of that responsibility had forged skills that no amount of peacetime training could replicate. The first shot rang out across the range, sharp and decisive in the morning air. The bullet struck the exact center of the target with surgical precision, creating a perfect hole that seemed impossibly small at 300 meters. The rangemaster lowered his binoculars slowly, blinking as if he couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. A murmur rippled through the crowd of soldiers, their previous confidence beginning to crack like ice under sudden pressure. James didn't pause to admire his shot. His training had taught him that consistency mattered more than individual moments of excellence. He cycled the bolt with mechanical efficiency and settled back into his shooting position. The second shot followed within seconds, and once again the bullet found its mark in the center ring, so close to the first hole that they nearly touched. "Bloody hell," whispered Private Collins, his earlier mockery forgotten as he stared downrange through his own scope. The target that had given him so much trouble now looked like child's play. The other soldiers exchanged uncertain glances, beginning to realize that they might have seriously misjudged the quiet man in the red tunic. The third shot continued the pattern of perfection, and by the fourth, a tense silence had fallen over the entire range. Even soldiers from other units had begun to gather, drawn by whispered reports of something extraordinary happening at the competition. James remained completely focused, his world narrowed down to the simple equation of sight alignment, breath control, and trigger squeeze. His final shot completed a grouping so tight that all 5 bullets could have been covered by a coin. The pattern was textbook perfect, the kind of shooting that most soldiers only heard about in stories from elite units. The range master had seen thousands of shooters over his career, but few had demonstrated this level of skill, especially with such casual ease. Corporal Davies stood frozen, his mouth slightly open as he tried to process what he had just witnessed. The man he had dismissed as a ceremonial decoration had just delivered a shooting performance that surpassed anything Davies had ever seen in person. The jokes and insults that had flowed so freely minutes earlier now seemed not just inappropriate, but embarrassingly naive. "Well," the rangemaster announced, his voice cutting through the stunned silence, "I think we need to move the targets back a bit further." It was partly a test and partly genuine curiosity about the limits of James's abilities. The older sergeant had begun to suspect that there was much more to the Royal Guard's background than anyone had realized. James nodded without speaking, still maintaining the focused calm that had settled over him like a familiar cloak. He watched as the targets were moved to 500 meters, a distance that would challenge even experienced military marksmen. Most of the soldiers present had never attempted shots at such range, and their earlier confidence had completely evaporated. The longer distance revealed the true gulf between amateur and professional marksmanship. Davies attempted the first shot and missed the target entirely, the bullet striking the earthen berm behind it. His second attempt barely caught the edge of the target, nowhere near the center rings. The other soldiers wisely declined to embarrass themselves further, stepping back to become spectators rather than participants. All eyes turned to James as he adjusted his position for the increased range. His movements remained unhurried and precise, each action purposeful and controlled. He made subtle adjustments to his scope, calculations that the other soldiers couldn't even begin to understand. The complexity of long-range shooting had always separated elite marksmen from ordinary riflemen. The mathematics involved were staggering. Trajectory calculations, wind drift compensation, even the rotation of the Earth became factors at extreme distances. James's SAS training had included weeks of instruction in these advanced concepts, knowledge that transformed shooting from a simple skill into a precise science. His instructors had been among the best snipers in the world, men who could place bullets with lethal accuracy at distances that seemed impossible. He settled behind the rifle once more, his breathing slowing to the measured rhythm that preceded perfect shots. The crowd watched in fascination and growing respect as he prepared to demonstrate skills that few of them had ever imagined possible. The ceremonial soldier they had mocked was about to show them what real precision looked like. The morning sun climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the range, as James prepared for shots that would forever change how these soldiers viewed both marksmanship and the quiet professionals who wore the red tunic of the Royal Guard. At 500 meters, James's first shot struck the bullseye with devastating accuracy, the impact clearly visible even to the naked eye. A collective gasp arose from the watching soldiers, many of whom had never seen shooting of this caliber outside of movies or military documentaries. The precision seemed almost supernatural, defying their understanding of what was humanly possible with a standard military rifle. The rangemaster found himself holding his breath as he watched James prepare for the second shot. Decades of experience had taught him to recognize exceptional talent, but this display exceeded anything in his memory. He began to wonder about the quiet man's background, sensing that there was a story here that went far beyond ceremonial duties and palace guard rotations. James's second shot landed so close to the first that it was difficult to distinguish between the two holes. His breathing remained controlled, his movements economical and purposeful. There was no wasted motion, no visible strain or effort, just the smooth execution of skills honed through years of intensive training and Real-world application under the most demanding conditions imaginable. Private Collins lowered his binoculars, with shaking hands, finally understanding the magnitude of his earlier mistake. The man he had mocked and dismissed was operating at a level that Collins couldn't even comprehend, let alone achieve. The jokes about palace guards and ceremonial soldiers now seemed not just wrong but deeply ignorant. By the fourth shot, word had spread throughout the base about the extraordinary shooting display taking place at the range. Officers and senior enlisted personnel began arriving to witness what was being described as the most impressive marksmanship demonstration anyone had ever seen. The crowd grew larger and more diverse, united in their amazement at the continuing display of precision. James's final shot at 500 meters completed another perfect grouping. 5 bullets clustered so tightly that they formed a single ragged hole in the center of the target. The achievement drew spontaneous applause from the gathered soldiers, a sound that mixed admiration with bewilderment. They were witnessing something that challenged their basic assumptions about skill, training, and the nature of military service itself. "I've never seen anything like that," admitted Corporal Davies, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and embarrassment. The man who had started the morning as the group's champion marksman now found himself humbled by a display of abilities that made his own skills seem elementary. His earlier confidence had been replaced by a deep respect for someone whose capabilities he had completely misjudged. The rangemaster made an unprecedented decision. "Let's try 800 meters, he announced, his voice carrying a note of scientific curiosity. This distance pushed into the realm of true long-range shooting, where factors like bullet drop and wind drift became major considerations. Most infantry soldiers never attempted shots beyond 600 meters, leaving such distances to specialized snipers and designated marksmen. A hush fell over the crowd as they realized they were about to witness something truly extraordinary. 800 meters was sniper territory, the domain of specialists who spent years perfecting their craft. The fact that James had agreed to attempt the shot, without hesitation, suggested a level of confidence that could only come from extensive experience at such ranges. The target at 800 meters appeared impossibly small through conventional scopes, a tiny speck that seemed to mock the idea of precise bullet placement. Wind conditions became critical at this distance, with even slight breezes capable of pushing bullets off target by significant margins. The mathematics involved in making accurate shots required knowledge that went far beyond basic military marksmanship training. James spent more time on his preparations now, reading wind flags and observing environmental conditions with the practiced eye of someone who understood their critical importance. His scope adjustments were more numerous and precise, accounting for the complex ballistics involved in sending a bullet accurately across such a vast distance. The watching soldiers recognized that they were observing a master craftsman at work. He settled into his shooting position with renewed focus, his entire being concentrated on the challenge ahead. The crowd fell completely silent, sensing that they were about to witness something that few people ever had the privilege to see. Even the base commander had arrived. Drawn by reports of the incredible shooting display taking place at the range, the morning air seemed to hold its breath as James prepared to demonstrate skills that would leave these soldiers with a story they would tell for the rest of their military careers. The first shot at 800 meters seemed to hang in the air forever before striking the target with pinpoint accuracy. Through high-powered spotting scopes, the officers could see that James had placed his bullet within inches of the bullseye, an achievement that would have been remarkable for a trained sniper using specialized equipment. The fact that he had accomplished it with a standard infantry rifle defied all conventional understanding of marksmanship limitations. Major Richardson, the base commander, found himself questioning what he was witnessing. He had served alongside some of the finest marksmen in the British Army during his 25-year career, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for this level of shooting precision. The quiet efficiency with which James operated suggested training that went far beyond anything offered to regular infantry units. The second shot struck even closer to the center, and by the third, a pattern was emerging that left the watching soldiers speechless. Each bullet seemed to find its mark with mechanical precision, as if James was operating some kind of advanced weapon system rather than a conventional rifle. The grouping he was creating at 800 meters was tighter than most soldiers could achieve at 200. "Sir," whispered the range master to Major Richardson, "I think we need to know more about this man's background." The older sergeant had served long enough to recognize when he was seeing something extraordinary, and his professional instincts told him that there was a story here that command needed to understand. Royal Guards weren't supposed to possess these kinds of skills. James continued his demonstration with unwavering focus, each shot adding to a performance that was rapidly becoming legendary among the base personnel. His fourth bullet struck so close to the previous three that they formed a single cluster, a feat that would have been impressive for any sniper team, let alone a single shooter using basic equipment. The precision was almost mechanical in its consistency. Word of the shooting demonstration had now reached the highest levels of base command, with calls being made to verify the identity and background of the Royal Guard who was creating such an extraordinary display. Major Richardson realized that he might be witnessing something that had significant implications beyond simple marksmanship training, and his military instincts told him to investigate further. The final shot at 800 meters completed, a grouping that measured less than 3 inches across. A performance that would have been remarkable at half the distance. The achievement drew another round of spontaneous applause from the crowd. But now the admiration was mixed with curiosity about James's background. Too many questions were arising for this to be dismissed as simple, natural talent. "I think it's time we move to the 1,000-meter range," announced Major Richardson, his voice carrying the authority of command but also genuine scientific interest. This was unprecedented territory, the kind of distance typically reserved for specialized sniper training and competitions. The decision sent a ripple of excitement through the gathered personnel, who sensed they were about to witness something truly historic. At 1,000 meters, the target became almost invisible to the naked eye, a tiny speck that challenged even experienced spotters to identify clearly. The technical challenges multiplied exponentially at this distance, with bullet drop, wind, drift, and atmospheric conditions all becoming critical factors. This was the realm where science met art, where shooters needed to understand physics as much as marksmanship. James examined his rifle carefully, checking every component with the methodical approach of someone who understood that equipment limitations became paramount at extreme ranges. His adjustments were more complex now, involving calculations that most of the watching soldiers couldn't even begin to follow. The mathematics of long-range shooting had always been the domain of specialists. The crowd grew even larger as news of the challenge spread throughout the base. Officers from multiple units arrived to witness what was being described as the most remarkable shooting display in the installation's history. Even civilian contractors and support personnel gathered at safe distances, drawn by reports of the extraordinary demonstration taking place at the range. As James prepared for the ultimate test of his abilities, the atmosphere became charged with anticipation and respect. The soldiers who had begun the morning mocking a palace guard now found themselves privileged witnesses to a display of skills that few of them had imagined possible. The quiet professional in the red tunic was about to attempt something that would cement his legend in the minds of everyone present. The morning sun reached its peak as James settled behind his rifle for the most challenging shots of his demonstration, preparing to show these soldiers what 3 years of SAS training could achieve when applied by someone who had learned his craft in the world's most demanding classroom. At 1,000 meters, the first shot took nearly 3 seconds to reach its target, the bullet traveling in a high arc that required precise calculation of trajectory and environmental factors. When the spotters confirmed a center hit, the crowd erupted in disbelief. The achievement represented a level of marksmanship that existed in the realm of legend rather than everyday reality, yet they had all witnessed it with their own eyes. Major Richardson immediately began making phone calls to higher command, realizing that he needed to understand exactly who James Morrison was and why a Royal Guard possessed such extraordinary capabilities. The demonstration had moved beyond impressive to potentially significant, raising questions about training programs and personnel assignments that might have broader implications for military planning. James's second shot at the extreme distance struck within inches of the first, confirming that the initial success had not been luck or chance. His breathing remained controlled, his movements precise and economical. There was no visible strain or effort, just the continued execution of skills that seemed to operate beyond normal human limitations. The watching soldiers began to understand that they were witnessing something truly exceptional. The third shot landed so close to the previous two that the spotters had difficulty distinguishing between the impacts. At this point, even the most skeptical observers had to accept that they were seeing marksmanship of the highest possible caliber. James was not just an excellent shot. He was operating at a level that suggested professional sniper training of the most advanced kind. "This is impossible," muttered Corporal Davies, his earlier arrogance completely forgotten. The man he had dismissed as a ceremonial decoration was demonstrating abilities that surpassed anything Davies had ever imagined possible. The precision and consistency of the shooting challenged his fundamental understanding of what human beings could achieve with conventional weapons. By the fourth shot, Major Richardson had received return calls from military headquarters that provided some answers to his questions about James's background. The information he received explained everything and nothing simultaneously. James Morrison had indeed served with distinction in Afghanistan, but the specific details of his service remained classified. The phrase special operations appeared multiple times in the brief summary he was given. Then, final shot at 1,000 meters, completed a grouping that defied all conventional understanding of marksmanship capabilities. 5 bullets fired from a standard infantry rifle had struck within a circle smaller than a dinner plate, at a distance of more than half a mile. The achievement represented shooting that was typically associated only with specialized sniper rifles, operated by the world's most elite marksmen. As James stood up from the firing line, the transformation was complete. The soldiers who had gathered to mock a palace guard now found themselves in the presence of someone whose skills commanded instant respect and admiration. The quiet professional in the red tunic had revealed capabilities that placed him among the elite warriors of the modern military, and everyone present understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary. "Sergeant Morrison," Major Richardson called out, his voice carrying new authority and respect. "I think we need to have a conversation about your background and current assignment." The base commander had realized that having someone with these capabilities standing guard at palace gates might represent a significant underutilization of exceptional talent and training. James nodded quietly, beginning the process of cleaning his rifle with the same methodical care he had shown throughout the demonstration. His expression remained calm and professional, showing no sign of pride or satisfaction at the amazed reaction surrounding him. For him, the shooting had simply been a matter of applying skills that had been drilled into him through years of intensive training and real-world experience. The rangemaster approached with obvious respect, his earlier skepticism completely replaced by professional admiration. "Sergeant, I've been running this range for 15 years and I've never seen shooting like that. Would you be willing to share some of your techniques with our marksmanship instructors?" The request represented a complete reversal from the morning's earlier attitudes. As word of the demonstration spread throughout the military community, James found himself at the center of a situation he had not sought but could not avoid. His quiet transfer to ceremonial duties had been intended to provide a peaceful conclusion to years of dangerous service, but his morning at the range had revealed capabilities that his superiors now wanted to understand and potentially utilize. The soldiers who had gathered to witness what they expected to be an embarrassing failure instead found themselves part of a story that would grow in the telling, a legend about the day a royal guard showed them what real warriors looked like when they decided to demonstrate their true abilities. Within hours of the shooting demonstration, James received orders to report to military headquarters for a comprehensive review of his current assignment and capabilities. The phone calls between Major Richardson and higher command had triggered a chain of inquiries that reached the highest levels of military leadership. Someone with his demonstrated skills was too valuable to waste on ceremonial duties, regardless of his personal preferences for a quiet posting. The story of the morning's events spread rapidly through military networks, growing with each telling, but never quite capturing the full impact of what the witnesses had experienced. Soldiers who had been present found themselves repeatedly asked to describe the shooting, and each account served to reinforce the legend of the Royal Guard who had revealed himself to be something far more dangerous than anyone had suspected. Corporal Davies spent the remainder of the day reflecting on his behavior and the assumptions he had made about James. The experience had taught him a humbling lesson about the dangers of judging people based on their current assignments rather than their capabilities. He realized that his mockery had not just been inappropriate, but potentially dangerous, as he had unknowingly taunted someone whose skills could have had very different applications in other circumstances. Private Collins found himself completely transformed by witnessing the demonstration. His earlier arrogance had been replaced by a deep respect for both James and the military profession itself. He began to understand that real warriors often operated quietly and without fanfare, their true capabilities hidden beneath whatever role circumstances required them to play. The lesson would influence his approach to military service for years to come. James spent the evening cleaning his equipment and preparing for what he suspected would be a significant change in his circumstances. The quiet period of ceremonial duty that he had welcomed after years of combat operations was about to end, but he accepted the development with the same calm professionalism he had shown throughout his career. His skills had been revealed and he understood the implications. The rangemaster submitted a detailed report of the day's events to his superiors, including precise measurements of James's shooting groups and his professional assessment of the demonstrated capabilities. The document would become part of a growing file that would influence decisions about James's future assignments and the military's approach to identifying and utilizing exceptional talent within its ranks. Major Richardson received additional, classified information about James's background that confirmed his suspicions about the true nature of his previous service. The details remained restricted, but the summary painted a picture of someone whose combat experience and training placed him among the elite professionals in the entire military system. The base commander began to understand why someone with these qualifications might seek the relative peace of ceremonial duties. As news of the demonstration reached other military installations, requests began arriving for James to visit and provide marksmanship instruction to specialized units. His shooting performance had impressed not just the soldiers who witnessed it, but also the professional military educators who recognized the value of learning from someone with his demonstrated capabilities and real-world experience. The following morning brought official orders transferring James to a new assignment that would make better use of his skills while still respecting his preference for reduced operational tempo. He would become a senior marksmanship instructor at the military's advanced training facility, a position that would allow him to pass on his expertise to the next generation of elite soldiers without requiring him to return to active combat operations. The soldiers who had witnessed the demonstration found their own careers influenced by the experience. Several applied for advanced marksmanship training programs, inspired by what they had seen and hoping to develop even a fraction of James's capabilities. The event had shown them standards of excellence that they had not previously imagined possible, raising their aspirations and commitment to professional development. Years later, the story of the Royal Guard who revealed his true nature at the shooting range would become a legend within military circles. The tale served as a reminder that real warriors could be found in unexpected places, that assumptions about people's capabilities could be dangerously wrong, and that respect should be earned through observation rather than granted based on appearances or current assignments. James Morrison eventually became one of the military's most respected marksmanship instructors, training hundreds of soldiers to achieve levels of shooting excellence that honored the standards he had demonstrated that memorable morning. His quiet professionalism and extraordinary skills continued to influence military training programs for decades, ensuring that his legacy extended far beyond a single day when some cocky soldiers learned what happened when they teased the wrong Royal Guard at the shooting range.